For hundreds of years, tomatoes were considered dangerous. The tomato's slow acceptance in Europe was due in part to weariness around the color red, which was perceived as sinful and supernatural. At one point, it was even considered deadly. In fact, educated people, doctors, botanists, scholars, were convinced that eating tomatoes could kill you. And for a long time, they had proof, or at least what looked like proof. Tomatoes arrived in Europe in the 1500s, brought over by Aztecs from South America. They were stranger looking, bright red, soft, juicy, nothing like the grains and roots people relied on. Worse, tomatoes looked a lot like plants Europeans had feared. They belonged to the nightshade family, the same group as deadly plants used in poisons and witchcraft. To Renaissance physicians, this was not a coincidence. If a plant looked dangerous, it probably was. They had no other way of confirming this but with visual clues. In 1597, prominent herbalist and botanist John Gerald called tomatoes corrupt and of rank and stinking savor in his book Herbal. This statement essentially sealed the tomato's fate in Great Britain and later with early American settlers. Some physicians claimed tomatoes produced melancholic vapors. Others warned they caused madness, and a few insisted they slowly dissolved internal organs. And tomatoes didn't just look dangerous, they behaved suspiciously. The tomato was nicknamed the poison apple because aristocrats would fall ill or die after consuming them. People who ate them sometimes got violently sick. Some even died shortly after eating tomato-heavy meals. Doctors drew the obvious conclusion: the tomato was poisonous. Here's the part no one understood. The tomato wasn't killing people, the plates they were served on were. Wealthy Europeans ate off pewter dishes, plates made with lead. Tomatoes are highly acidic. When tomato juice touched lead, it leached the metals into the food. So aristocrats who could afford tomatoes were the ones getting sick. Headaches, vomiting, hallucinations, and for some, death. No one considered the possibility of the tableware. They blamed the ingested food, which makes sense without knowing the dangers of lead. I mean, we painted our walls with this stuff up until about 50 years ago. So people stayed away and feared the tomato. They were grown as decorative plants, not food. People admired them from a distance, like flowers you don't touch. In England, tomatoes were written about with deep suspicion. In parts of Europe, they were fed to animals, never people. Cookbooks ignored them, medical texts warned against them. When tomatoes reached North America, they brought their reputation with them. Early colonists viewed tomatoes as ornamental curiosities, something interesting to grow, not something you'd serve for dinner. Even in the 1700s, American doctors repeated European warnings. Tomatoes were said to cause appendicitis, ulcers, and internal decay. Parents warned children away from them. Doctors discouraged patients from eating them. And once again, any illness that followed a tomato meal became confirmation. By the early 1800s, scientific thinking was changing. Some people began to suspect tomatoes weren't really poisonous. So in 1820, a man named Robert Gibbon Johnson decided to settle the matter publicly. He stood on the steps of a courthouse in Salem, New Jersey, in front of a crowd, and ate an entire basket of tomatoes. People expected him to collapse and die, but he didn't. He didn't even get sick. He finished the tomatoes, bowed, and walked away. The crowd was stunned, and just like that, the tomato's reputation began to crack. Large-scale immigration to America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly from Italians who brought with them the invention of pizza, contributed to the eventual consumption of tomatoes. Once tomatoes were accepted as edible, things moved fast. They appeared in cookbooks, they spread through home gardens, they became central to cuisines that now seem impossible without them. Cooking changed forever as tomatoes became a mainstay. The same fruit once blamed for death became essential to daily life. For decades in Salem, New Jersey, the town held the Salem Tomato Festival, where locals and visitors would watch reenactments of Johnson's event, wear costumes, and of course eat tomatoes. So as it turns out, tomatoes weren't dangerous. But this showcases that once an idea becomes publicly accepted and propelled by the medical community, it can take centuries to challenge and eventually undo it. The tomato survived its trial in the long run because somebody decided to question a long-held belief. Today, North Americans consume an equivalent of 57 pounds of raw tomatoes each every year, and it has become one of the most consumed produce in the world.